Hey, welcome to Five Favorites. I have Travis Gafford with me. Travis is an esports sort of commentator and
Personality,
guru,
yes.
personality. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I've been working in gaming for about, I don't know, 11, 12 years now. I do League of Legends esports coverage and big fan of Brandon's books. Really enjoyed them for all these years. We've done a couple interviews now and yeah, excited to be here.
And I roped you into a Five Favorites. Really, Adam did that. I
Yes.
just kind of show up.
Yes, yeah. You showed up and you were very confused why you were here.
Yeah,
You're
like,
like, what is this?
what?
Where's shouldn't I be writing right now? Yes, I think so.
That they're not going to believe that when they see that I've actually prepared. But
Fair enough.
But we, if you haven't seen this show before, just as a way that the two of us can chat, we come up, we let the guest pick a topic for five of their favorite things. They don't have to be in order, though I put mine in order of my preference.
Yes.
They don't have to be in order. They're just five things you love under a certain sort of topic. You pick the topic, video game worlds.
Yes.
So best video game worlds, that either best world building or places you want to visit.
Yeah, I think just ones you've enjoyed playing through,
Yeah.
like ones that whenever you just think, oh, I think this is a really cool,
Yeah.
interesting world. I thought that would be fun because
It's a great idea.
You build worlds, I do video game stuff. You play video games. It's
Yeah.
just it's an easy
It's
setup.
the perfect crossover. So the
Yes.
way we're going to do this is we'll start with my number 5 and then your number 5 so that you can kind of have the last number 1.
Yes.
And I'm going to be shocked if there isn't a lot of overlap.
Okay.
In our numbers, but or at least some overlap. I mean, there's a lot of video games out there, but they're just certain video games that are known for their lore. My number 5 is Elder Scrolls.
Elder Scrolls. Yeah.
Elder Scrolls.
Not on my list, but I definitely is an honorable mention.
Yeah.
Because it's fantastic.
And the reason I picked Elder Scrolls, I have a reason for each of these.
Yes.
By the way, I should say I gave myself a few restrictions. I decided not to put anything on here that was based on another property.
Yes.
So I didn't put The Witcher on, for instance. I didn't put on, anything based on, there's some really great Star Wars games. Knights of the Old Republic did more for the lore of Star Wars than I think any of the films did,
Yes.
right? I didn't put those on, despite both of them having excellent world building. And I only put one per property on my list, so that I didn't have like a bunch of sequels or things like that.
See, I cheated a little bit
yes.
because I would just do entire
Oh, yeah.
worlds from entire games or whatever.
I mean, that works for some, but there's at least one on my list where
Okay,
it doesn't work well.
I'm excited.
So my reason for Elder Scrolls is an example of how to do something that is done poorly very often, but they're doing it well, which is to take the classic Tolkien-esque world building of the kind of generic medieval fantasy that a lot of people do. Not that Tolkien was that.
Right.
Tolkien was not. But it kind of has become this thing that, it went through D&D and then into video games, and you just end up with this sort of genericized elves and dwarves and things like that. And Elder Scrolls, I think, did it's kind of a masterclass in how to take that, make it your own. It does not feel like it's just straight Tolkien knockoff. It doesn't feel generic either. And with their dwarves, the what do you call them, the Dwugar?
Yes.
These ancient catacombs that you go down and find all this metalwork. They're different takes on the elves. They're additions of some other races. Morrowind being like the gold standard, but I also thought that Oblivion did a good job with the Oblivion Gates and things like that. And Skyrim, I mean, it's one of the best-selling video games of all time, and the ambiance and world building for something that should feel kind of generic, because it's just like, here is, generic Scandinavia land, but it doesn't. And so, big thumbs up to the Elder Scrolls team and just being able to take something and make it work like that.
Well, I think similarly, one of the things that's really cool about the Elder Scrolls games is just how much, as you said, you can kind of They made it their own, but they also allow people to make it their own,
yes,
right? Like if it was truly super generic, I don't think people would spend so much time exploring, creating their own kind of stories and creating almost like a sandbox experience.
Yeah.
And I just don't feel like people would do that if it was a very basic world.
Yeah.
And so no, I think they were definitely on that list for me, and I got pretty close to putting them on there, but. I have a couple others.
Okay,
So
give me your number 5.
So for number 5, I put Final Fantasy 9 on.
Okay. Ooh, 9.
Yes.
Ooh, now that's an interesting choice.
I know. So I played 7 Remake recently. I really did enjoy it. And when I was growing up, my first Final Fantasy was 8. But something about 9, I think, maybe similar to what you were talking about with Elder Scrolls, it's like it is a fantasy world, and yet it feels very unique. You know, like 7 and 8 have kind of like a grungy nature to them. 9 somehow found this like mystical, interesting confluence of genres and designs that I really enjoyed, and all the characters felt really unique, and they're not. I don't know. I just really enjoyed it.
It was really nice to play 9 and have a different protagonist.
Yes.
Because as much as I like Squall and Cloud, they kind of feel similar.
Yes.
Broody.
Yes.
One's blonde, one's brunette. But,
Yes.
the other nice thing about Final Fantasy 9 is it kind of plays up some of the Final Fantasy things, like, the white mage, the black mage, this sort of stuff, building around their own world building in ways that were quite interesting, that are kind of tropes all through the Final Fantasy series. 9 highlights some of those things the best.
Yeah.
At least since some of those very early ones.
This is a little less off-world, but I felt like the characters themselves are also just, I think, really unique, even, as you said, with protagonists, but with others. I thought it was really good.
Okay, well, I am going to give my number 4 now. My number 4 is Dark Souls.
I figured it would be making an appearance.
It would make an appearance. Now, it's not the highest on the list because my love of Dark Souls is partially about how they do the lore rather than the lore itself. But there is stuff about the lore itself that I really like. And I picked Dark Souls over Elden Ring because I love this idea. Like, they come up with lots of cool iterations on the same idea if you play through the whole series.
Yeah.
And I do think the whole series lends a cool weight to how this world is falling. Like, I love playing 2 and finding the references to 1. And I love playing 3 and finding the references to 2 and 1, that it's now been hundreds or thousands of years, and even the names have been lost to time. And that how that reinforces the idea that everything is going downhill, and it's been going downhill so long that you've played 3 games separated by thousands of years of things going downhill, and it just lands. It lands so well for me playing those games.
Well, I was going to ask, I assume it's really interesting because they do lore in such a very different way than maybe the way you do, right? Because it's so hidden and so subtle.
Yeah.
You kind of have to like go in and really start to piece it together.
Oh, man. I love that aspect about it because I love stories being told in different ways. I tell stories in a certain way in books, so people assume I want stories told that way.
Yeah.
But no, that's how books work for me. Playing through, it's the first one, Demon Souls, when I played through that, and realizing how they were doing lore and how well it matched their medium was just, one of those moments where I'm like, you could never have done this in a book, and now you can do it here, and I loved it.
Well, and it kind of goes along with the gameplay too, where they're like, okay, we're throwing you into the deep end, and also the lore, we're throwing you into the deep end.
Yep.
So, very good. Okay. Number 4 for me is going to be somewhat controversial, and it's somewhat of a surprise for me that it is even on the list. I also avoided your, or I mostly tried to go with your, like, this can't be based on another IP. Technically, this is based on another IP, but I feel like it's fine. Cyberpunk.
Okay.
So I really enjoyed Cyberpunk 2077 despite the bugs. I did think it was not nearly as good as what they'd done with Witcher, and I know all the issues that should have been delayed, but I feel like there is not very many games that go in that, like, into a cyberpunk type world.
Right.
And they usually do far future or something like in space or whatever.
The nice thing about Cyberpunk also is you feel like you're playing in a cyberpunk world.
Yes.
Because I've played games that have a cyberpunk setting, but I don't feel I'm playing as a cyberpunk. You really feel it in that game. I really liked Keanu in that.
Yes.
I really liked a lot of the things about it. It didn't make my list, but it would be honorable mention. I think it's also kind of unfair to compare it to The Witcher, where they had 3 games plus expansions to really refine, and this was just straight out the gate. And I know from behind the scenes how much it costs to make a video game, how hard it is to make a video game. I was in touch with those guys while they were making it and while they were working on Edge Runner and what became Edge Runner and things like that. And I have an enormous amount of respect for them, despite the fact that the launch was a little bumpy.
Yeah. As you said, you really do. I mean, this is such a cliche thing to say, but you really feel like you're in a cyberpunk world. And I think it just scratched an itch that I didn't know that I really had until I got into it. And I think it's funny, this kind of conversation sometimes I think skews itself towards more modern games because the worlds have gotten more vivid and alive. And Cyberpunk, just with the graphics and what you can pull off now, it's very immersive. So yeah.
Okay, well that is an interesting.
I know, controversial.
It is a little bit controversial.
We'll see where your comments. Hopefully, your commenters are quite polite on this YouTube video.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I think that my number 3, controversial is the wrong take, but it number 3 was actually the hard slot for me to fill. Because I knew what my 4 and 5 were going to be. They were going to be these ones that I think did something that it wasn't about the world building, but they did something really interesting with it, if that makes sense. And then I knew my 1 and 2 kind of almost immediately. And then what's my 3? What fills in the slot that kind of transitions between them? I considered Fallout for a while, and I eventually didn't put Fallout in the slot, though it's an honorable mention for me.
Same for me.
Because adding the 1950s aesthetic to it just makes that whole thing pop.
Yes.
And the original games, particularly the first 2, just really, and then New Vegas, just do a good job. So it's like it almost went in this slot. But I ended up picking something that I think was more interesting to me, and that was Undertale.
Oh, this is really cool. I like this.
Now, see, the reason I picked Undertale is because I wanted each of my picks to say something.
Yeah.
And what Undertale is just the wonderful example of how to make a story around world building. A lot of people ask me, where do your ideas come from? Is it world first? Is it character first? Is it, plot first? And all 3 have happened to me.
Yeah.
And you want your world building to, in a really great story, be a character in the story. And if you haven't played Undertale, it is a pretty simple world building in a lot of ways. It's not like, Elder Scrolls, where you can go explore every nook and cranny and find pieces of lore in them. It's not like, Dark Souls, where every item has this, intricate lore description. It is more straightforward. It's made by basically one person, right? And because of that, it kind of is the oddball on my list. But at the same time, I think that the story of a simple allegory of humans and monsters being done in such a way that really makes the lore fit the gameplay. Like, if you haven't played it, when you save, it even says you are filled with resolve. Is that the term they use?
I think so.
Where it's like your gameplay and your world building. World building is that you are actually saving because you've reached a place where it's filled you with resolve that you can keep going. And even if you fail, you will get back up and keep going. And so the world building dovetails into gameplay in a way I had never actually experienced despite playing games since I was a kid. That I love when you can make. And it's very hard to do in games, almost impossible. I love when you can make your deaths diegetic, that it's part of the game.
Yeah.
When you can make everything that's happening diegetic, and they don't go quite that far in this. But, gameplay mechanics are diegetic. The fact that it is a game is diegetic, and all of that stuff. Diegetic being a term that means it exists in world.
Right.
And Undertale it did something new with world building, and I love it for that.
Yeah. I absolutely love that I went with Cyberpunk, and I'm like, these graphics, these beautiful things are so immersive, and then you come out of left field with Undertale, just completely showing that you don't need all that stuff to create a really cool world.
Yep, and at the end, Undertale kicks you, punches you in the gut because of the world building.
Yeah,
I feel.
No, I think it's really good, and I also just love that lesson. To your point, I don't have really any indie games on here, but I do love that there's been like this pushback, I think, over the past decade or so against like feeling like you need to have some huge budget to do something really, really big and really, really cool. And you can get that sense of fullness from an individual who's making the game on their own.
Yeah, Braid almost, didn't there's not enough for it to make my list, but it was one I considered for a little bit because the underpinning world building that made the narrative happen is really interesting to the gameplay in a similar way.
Yeah, I'm not this type of person, but I think similar, like kind of adjacent to that. I'm thinking about people who've made singular games. Stardew Valley was made entirely by one person, and for a lot of people, that is a world where they are able to do so much. Just even though it is again the opposite of like a AAA Cyberpunk type game. So,
yeah, exactly. I think I will say this. I know there might be writing for my indie game slot that I didn't put Hollow Knight here. Hollow Knight is totally also worthy of an honorable mention, maybe worth being on the list.
Yeah. If we're sneaking in honorable mentions, I have to sneak in League of Legends because they did Arcane. So they have a world. It does not exist within League of Legends when you're playing Summoner's Rift. Really, you touch just the slightest part of it, right? But with Arcane, and they're making an MMO and all this stuff, and so I think they will get there.
Slip in as many honorable mentions as you want.
Okay, yeah, very, very good. I feel like if I do that, it pads it, and then the comments will be more nice. All right, so number 3, I know leaning back to the AAA, but I'm very curious. How much do you know about Death Stranding?
So I know a ton about it for someone who's never played it.
Yes.
Like I've even watched some of the cutscenes.
Yes.
I've watched gameplay footage. I've watched people tumble down hills and lose all their stuff.
Yes. Probably watched the donkey videos about it. Yes,
I've watched the donkey videos about it.
Yes.
I've watched some Let's Plays. Let's Plays for Death Stranding take forever, it feels like. And so I haven't watched an entire Let's Play, but I know as much about it, I think, as a person can know without having played it.
So for me, this is like the perfect thing to put on here for literally the world. Because the world, when we're talking about video game worlds, just being out in the open world, like there's so many things in movies and television and video games, especially where a post-apocalyptic world is there's just stuff everywhere and there's monsters everywhere and you're in these like rundown cities and all this stuff. And I mean, Last of Us, good example. Like there's a million of these things.
You can't
right?
walk anywhere in Fallout without some giant bees attacking you. And you're like, how did anyone ever exist in this world?
And they're bees and you're stepping on broken bottles and you're picking up all this stuff. One of the things that was really cool to me about Death Stranding is you go out into this world and you're just in these beautiful vistas. You know, I mean, it really does feel, I mean, it's very, I believe, Icelandic inspired in a lot of areas. And they will, like Kojima found these amazing songs that will just start playing that really make you feel, I don't know, just immersed is a bit of a cliche to say, but you're just walking through this crazy valley and it's coming up around you and it's so empty and quiet and lonely. And so like the world has ended and everybody's living in these little bunkers. But again, it's not a situation where you're in that Fallout world of like clutter and everything. You're just alone.
Right.
And I think they capture that.
I think you talk about gameplay and world building kind of overlapping and helping each other. I mean, I've heard it explained that the thing that makes Death Stranding work is that emptiness and that kind of loss, followed by finding someone else's ladder they set up for you and realizing someone is out there helping me and feeling so thankful for that help in that moment that gives you this connection to this distant player. That's the genius I've heard of that game.
Yeah, and I think just like that, it's seeing these little things. You don't see other people; they don't show you the players, but there's just like a rope there, and you climb up it, and it makes your life a million times easier as you're going through this empty void of beautiful space. I really, really like that world.
That's a good choice.
Yeah, thank you.
So there hasn't been a ton of crossover yet.
No.
But here's our first crossover.
Okay.
My number 2 is Final Fantasy X.
Oh, okay.
I only let myself put one Final Fantasy on. 10 I had to pick. It's also made my list of my favorite games multiple times because the world building of 10 just popped out at me in ways that very few video games ever have. Whether it's mostly about this whole idea of, again, I love it when gameplay and is diegetic, right? And so in Final Fantasy X, if you haven't played it, like one of the main characters' job is to lay the spirits to rest of these monsters that are rampaging. And after you kill, you have an encounter and kill monsters, she's laying them to rest so that their spirits won't rise again. And it is a little bit of a post-apocalyptic fantasy where you need these people. And so why is it so dangerous out there? Why are you adventuring? Well, you need to go out there and kill these things and then lay them to rest so that other people can walk these roads and be safe. And there's a big journey going on and this whole thing that they love in Final Fantasy, the Philip K. Dick asks, what is real? Who is real? What does it mean to dream? When are dreams real? What does this all mean? It's so beautifully done. I love world building with fantasy occupations.
Yeah.
One of the things that I just love. Like fantasy occupations other than adventurer. Right? When the occupation is, my job is to lay the spirits to rest that are rising to kill people. That's a job in a fantasy world that feels exciting, interesting, and new. And then Blitzball was just cool. Blitzball was just cool.
I was going to say, you have on one hand, you've got, like, my job is to lay spirits to rest, and then you have, on the other hand, I'm a professional Blitzballer.
Yes. Esports.
Yes.
Yeah. We've got our esports guy, and you talked about the hero for 9, whose name...
Titus.
Zidane.
Yeah, Titus.
Titus had the same effect on me, where I'm like, you know what? It is so nice to play a Final Fantasy game where your hero isn't this tormented, angsty thing. It's just the guy who likes to play basketball.
Yeah.
He's been thrown into a fantasy world. He's really good at basketball or soccer or in this case blitzball. He's just really, really good at it. And now he's on a fantasy adventure, and he's just there for you.
Yeah.
He's there. He's your bud who's taking care of you. If there's a partial inspiration for Adolin out there, it's Titus.
Oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I could see that. See that. Okay, so number 2 is a little complicated for me because it's everything up until a point, which is the Warcraft world.
Okay.
So I will probably say up through maybe Wrath of the Lich King, which is the 3rd expansion in WoW.
Okay.
And it really starts for me at around Warcraft 3. So that was the first. I had not played 1 and 2.
Okay.
I remember getting Warcraft 3, and there were these. You get it with the CD, and there was the brochure, the handbook in it, or the guide, and you open it up, and past the instructions on how to install and how the game works, there's like all the lore for like from what happened in 1 and 2, and like information on all the different races, and I think that was early. Like I enjoyed reading a lot of fun stuff, fantasy for a while, but that was one of the first times where I was really enjoying. It was like before there were wiki binges on lore, like that was. I started to go down the rabbit hole, and then playing through the campaign Warcraft 3 was really great. And then being able to go to WoW when WoW came out, and suddenly you were in the world. You didn't just have this top-down situation. You were creating one of these characters. And so I think that sort of transition from watching the story play out as you're doing it to being what felt like much more of an active participant in WoW, and it being one of the first really major and successful MMOs where you're able to just go to like completely different zones and feel like it was a really big thing. Now I feel like they had to keep coming out with it every couple of years, and you start to run out of maybe oil at a certain point in time on creating all these expansions. I still go back and play a little bit every time a new expansion drops, but I think especially the early days of WoW and Warcraft 3.
So I have the backwards experience of you. I played Warcraft 1, 2, and then 3, and never played WoW.
Oh, interesting.
And so my experience for Warcraft was starting with, this is just Warhammer.
Yeah, yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then seeing them make it their own in 3. Because 3 is really where it started to have its own cool lore for me,
right,
and the heroes and things like that, and really legitimately enjoying 3. 3 is the one I played the most of and enjoyed the most, and then WoW came out, and I'm like, I am not touching that. No MMOs for me. I need to write books.
Yes.
And so I stayed completely away from WoW. I have never sat down and played a minute of World of Warcraft.
Yeah, well, I think for many of us fans, we'll say that's a good decision. Please don't do it. Please stay away from it because it can be kind of all-consuming.
I did have a roommate who played it as soon as it came out, and we didn't see him after that for quite a long time. We couldn't get him to go out to dinner with us anymore and things like that. So I have this kind of feeling of, wow, I'm like, despite knowing some of the people who work there,
Yeah.
a friend of mine's a quest writer at WoW and things like that. And they brought me in once and asked me if I wanted to write books for them and things like that. They were very nice to me.
Yeah.
Not gonna touch it. I played a ton of Diablo, because I could finish Diablo, but no WoW at all.
Yeah. Yeah. A good decision.
All right, so my number one, it's kind of interesting because when you gave me this topic,
Yes.
I felt like there was only one possible number one. And it's going to be very interesting because I thought anyone would pick this
Yes.
as their number one. And so I just assumed that it would be the same on everyone's list, and that's Bioshock. Right?
Okay.
Like, if you're going to go with best world building in a video game, the Bioshock series, I think is just hands down. Like, it's even an order of magnitude better than anything else on my list. The incorporation of, in the originals, objectivism as a philosophy. Like, you don't see a lot of video games pick a philosophy and build world build around that, which is just genius.
Yeah.
How the ambiance feels, how you interact with the ambiance, the sort of dark nature of it. Then to go to Infinite and have them do the same thing again with jingoism and kind of American exceptionalism as a different philosophy to take, and then the plots being fantastic in both of them,
Yes.
being able to twist twice, and have the twist hit both times, having two polar opposite locations that feel so fresh and interesting, using your world building against you and your assumptions against you. There are no video games I have ever played that have risen to that level of combining world building with plot, with narrative, and my expectations, and real world philosophy. And so I just give them the absolute gold star.
So it's not my first.
But it didn't even make your list.
I know.
I am shocked to be proven wrong.
I think I have a pretty good first, but I will say I think that yours is fantastic and really reasonable. I loved, without going into spoilers, I loved the end of Infinite.
Yeah, the end of Infinite was so good.
Yeah. And just sort of, yes, it was really, really good. I'm avoiding all spoilers, but yes.
One of my top moments in all of video game was the cutscene at the end of Infinite.
Yes, agreed. Especially because 1 and 2 felt very different than Infinite, and so you thought, they're just going in a... Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I agree with you a ton. I think and we talked a lot about the uniqueness of some of these games, and I think the uniqueness of that world is really, really well done.
I mean, if you look at my books, I love taking non-traditional fantasy settings.
Yeah.
And this is a non-traditional science fiction setting. Just did such a good job with it. So.
Yes. All right. So, number one for me, I don't think you've played these because I don't think I've ever heard you mention them in your content.
Otherwise, they might be on my list.
Yes. They would be. Mass Effect.
Okay, I have played Mass Effect.
Oh, okay. Have you played all three?
I played one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think this is why, I suspect this is why it's not on your list. So Mass Effect for me, and part of the reason I think this is probably sitting here is because they did the anniversary edition that came out recently.
I bought
they
it.
Brought them all
I
together.
haven't played it. I didn't have the time, but I bought it because I'm like, I wanted a remaster.
Yes.
I'm like, all right, it's out. It's on the Steam sale. You know how Steam sales are. Like, boink, boink,
Yes.
boink.
Legendary edition is what it's called. Yes. I know people will hate me for saying this, but you should play it.
Okay.
Because it is. I know we're talking about worlds, but the storytelling is a huge. Well, here's my spiel. So, Mass Effect, I think, does a lot of what I like about Star Trek in video games. I know you also like Star Trek.
I do like Star Trek.
And it is a sort of not too distant to feel unrelatable version of humanity. And also a fairly optimistic representation of humanity. Where sci-fi, I love a lot of the darker versions of how bad things can get in the future, but I really do like the optimism that's in Mass Effect. And I think they did such a good job of building out also really great alien races that are so well fleshed out, so unique that whenever you start to get these characters as companions, especially in 2 and 3, where you start to build like the squad. 2 has a lot of Mistborn Final Empire in it, where you're building the Ocean's 11 heist situation to deal with some stuff.
So let me talk you through my problems with it.
Okay.
Because I did consider it, having only played one of them.
Yes.
There's a couple of things. And I'll say my wife's cousin is on the team over there and works on the Mass Effect games.
Yes.
And so I've only played one. And I had a visceral reaction to 2 in that I started 2 and it did not let me continue this. Like, I had built a character and a persona and a romance in 1, and 2's like, nope, doesn't exist.
Oh, okay, but okay.
Yeah.
When did you start to play 2?
Like, I picked it up right after 1.
So fascinating, because you should be able to import your character from 1 into 2, and all those decisions and everything should carry over.
It didn't work for me, I guess. Maybe there was some bug in it.
It'll be fixed in Legendary.
I'd heard that was the case, but also, like, I'm like, wait a minute, what about this character that I'd had a romance with? Wasn't even in the game.
So
like, that is immersion breaking for me.
So they are in 2.
They are both of the options.
Yes.
Or I guess there's multiple options.
Yeah. Okay. Mass Effect spoilers, everybody.
Don't give me too many spoilers. I plan to play 2.
But
I'm like,
from 1 to 2. So if you get separated in the beginning because you played the beginning,
you
will find them again later.
I went online and looked, and I guess someone just told me wrong. But the biggest hindrance, actually, I would have kept playing, is that they changed all the weapon mechanics and controls. And I just hit a speed bump because I had gotten so used to the shooter mechanics in 1, and then I went to 2, and I just said, I can't play this right now because it's playing wrong because I'm used to playing the first one. It's like I tried to play Salt and Sanctuary, and they had bound the roll button to a different role than you have in Dark Souls. And I just played Dark Souls. And I'm like, I can't play this game.
So
and so I said, I'll play it again later, and then never picked it up.
I mean, I've had that happen to me with games too. I think people usually really like the changes they made in 2 and 3 for combat.
I read that. I heard
it's
that
a lot more action-y.
It works way better.
Yes.
It's just I was so used to the control mechanics for 1, and I didn't. 3 wasn't out yet.
Yeah.
So I played 1 and then went right to 2. I think it was when 2 was out, and it was so jarring to me.
Yeah.
And then, I did think that the world building was solid. I was really impressed with the fact that I knew they'd had the license to Star Wars and lost it, and then had to build a science fantasy like Star Wars from the ground up.
Yes. No, and I'll finish my spiel on the world building stuff because it's so good. So 1, I think they do such a good job building out these alien races. 2, they made a fairly big map and a lot of different planets, and the fact that you get to go back to some of them in different games feels really cool because you've seen how they've changed. Like, I will say this, Bioshock is great. There has been nothing that I can think of in gaming that has tried to be as ambitious from a storytelling perspective as Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 because the choices, and I'm sorry you didn't have this experience because I think it's one of the best parts, choices carrying over between 1, 2, and 3. When you start in 1 and you create this character and then you go through this entire journey and you get to 3, the ending of 3 was very controversial when it came out because they kind of flubbed the landing. They then did a bunch of DLC that people didn't play.
They fixed it.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a little bit of weirdness, but
here's the question: do I play 1 again?
I think so.
Or am I going to hit that same speed bump in control mechanics, or did they change the controls to be smooth all through the 3?
They fixed a lot of the stuff. It is a different gameplay experience a little bit from the control perspective, but they streamlined it a lot in 1. They fixed a lot. My recommendation is you can find a guide online that's like, here's what order to do the stories in, because especially some of the DLC came out after, so you have to figure out like when to do it. And then it'll tell you which ones are pretty skippable. Most of the stuff in Mass Effect 1 is fairly skippable from the side content stuff. Then you go and you do 2 and 3, and it's got a lot better.
I will say that I was so excited by the idea of exploring a lot of planets in 1, and then they were all the same planet.
Listen, 2 and 3.
Yeah,
2 and 3 is where it's at.
Okay. That's why it's not on my list, is I haven't played the good ones yet.
Yeah.
And 1 was good.
Yes.
I shouldn't say that. I haven't played the fantastic ones yet.
Yes.
So, all right. I own it. I have very few excuses.
You're a busy man. I think you have excuses. You've created just some of your own stuff.
Once I finish Stormlight 5, I can do that.
Okay, good to know.
All right, Travis, thank you so much for being on 5 Favorite with us. Let us know in the comments where we were stupid, which has better world building as our number 1, Mass Effect or Bioshock. And I'll be back sometime once we can rope someone else into doing this with us.